I'm back, and we are talking about the historic event that happened in a downtown Manhattan court today. For the first time in U.S. history, a former president was charged, and in this case, 34-count indictment, criminal charges against Donald Trump for allegedly making false business statements related to covering up an affair he had with Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. Joining me in this hour is criminal defense attorney Mutaki Akbar and Republican political commentator Melanie Collette. Right before we went to break, Melanie, you were making a point. Go ahead.
Was going to say that I don't recall anybody who was defending Donald Trump, defending his possible immoral actions. What they were saying is that he is being unfairly treated, unfairly persecuted, and that if his name wasn't Donald J. Trump, like, he would not have been charged with this crime. My understanding is that the payments didn't even start till after the election. How is that in any way, shape, or form connected to well, in New Jersey, it's called elect. I've been a treasurer on a couple of campaigns. I'm very familiar with the complexities of campaign law, at least here in New Jersey. But they wouldn't have even known about it till after the filing. You have to file, like, I don't know, in New Jersey, it's like 29 days after Election Day.
Well, I'm glad you bring up the issue of filing, because that's at the heart of this case. Mutaki, because Melanie is right. If these payments were not made for the purpose of influencing the 2016 presidential election, then it isn't a crime. And that's going to be the burden on the part of the prosecution. They have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the payments were intended. They started in 2017. The deal was made with Stormy Daniels' lawyer 2 weeks before the 2016 campaign. So the $130,000 paid to Stormy Daniels' attorney happened 2 weeks before the 2016 election. It was in 2017 that Donald Trump starts to pay back Michael Cohen, who had set up the Shell Corporation, and they were trying to figure out how does Michael Cohen get his money back? And Michael Cohen didn't just want the money back. If he was going to have to claim that $130,000 as income, Mutaki, he also wanted to be paid back the taxes that he had to pay on the $130,000. So if the payments were really intended to keep these negative stories about affairs from coming out before that 2016 election, then obviously those payments were political spending. And if they're political spending from from a candidate or an agent of the candidate's campaign, they are subject to contribution limits and reporting requirements. And we know that these payments were not reported, and that in fact they were registered in checks written to Michael Cohen, and he was paid over time as fake payments for legal services for Michael Cohen, because Michael Cohen was a barred lawyer at the time. But how is the government going to prove what these payments were intended for, that the payments were really aimed at influencing the election versus trying to keep his affairs away from his wife and family?
I think they're just going to have to connect the dots, and connecting the dots would be, like you just stated, the $130,000 was paid to Stormy Daniels before the elections, and he stated that. Well, I think they can show that we need to keep her, what they call it, like catch and trap or trap and catch.
Catch and kill.
Catch and kill, right. So catch the bad news and kill it before it comes out. And so right. Stormy Daniels and Ms. McCullough were the bad news, and they wanted to stop it from coming out because they thought if it came out, then it could affect the election. And so if the $130,000 was paid by Michael Cohen, that in order to affect the election, or that would have been considered a campaign contribution or something going towards the campaign, which would have needed to be reported. And I think that's the theory that they're going under. And then if he's paying them back for that and in the taxes, then that also, it's all connected. So it starts with the $130,000 and then it goes towards, the repayments. And each repayment was used to cover up the fact that the $130,000 was paid in order to not affect the election, which would be the intent to defraud those election laws and those tax laws, because they're adding money on in order to cover those taxes, and lying and saying that it was used for Michael Cohen's legal fees. So that's the connection, and they'll just have to connect those dots in order to show that.
Yeah, we know oftentimes the cover-up is worse than the crime, and many folks go to jail because they are involved in illegal activity. Then they try to cover it up. Melanie, I want to ask you, though, about Donald Trump's response. So he's been acting, all big and bad, like this doesn't faze him. We know he's raising money on the indictment. I read at one point he had raised $7 million, and I read another time it was $4 million. But really what I want to ask you about are these veiled threats that he's making towards Alvin Bragg. He's brought his wife into it. There was a photograph that he tweeted holding a baseball bat. Donald Trump can be upset. Anybody that gets indicted, Joe Blow, on the corner, nobody wants to be hauled into court and have to face legal jeopardy. No one wants to have to hire lawyers. No one wants to go to trial and have to face that decision. Do I testify on my own behalf, or do I try to raise reasonable doubt through other evidence? So we get it. He's mad. He's frustrated. Of course, anybody would be. But he takes his frustration a step further, and he starts intimidating or trying to intimidate and threaten people. So to the extent the Republicans aren't going to stand up to him because he is violating everything they've stood for, and now you're suggesting that the Republican Party wasn't the family values party. Okay.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Okay, because y'all like to change up whatever. You go with the wind.
What I said was is that we don't pick on single mothers.
Well, that's not accurate, too. If we had more time, we could pull you some receipts on that as well.
We'll do a separate show.
But talk to me about these threats.
What
we
threats?
know he's threatening Alvin Bragg.
How is he threatening him?
The post, and maybe I could have my producer pull it up, the tweet, if it's probably been deleted by now.
That's what you consider. If that's what he considers a threat, then he's doing pretty well as a prosecutor. I'm sure. Oh, and you know what? He probably doesn't get threatened by legitimate violent bad guys because he never sends them to jail. So maybe that's why that's considered a threat. A Facebook post is. I don't consider that.
Well, we know
threat.
That's how Donald
on social media plenty of times by men, and I'm a single woman because of my political beliefs. I don't look at that as a threat. Alvin Bragg's a grown behind man. If he's threatened by a graphic on social media, then he's probably in the wrong business.
Well, we know, Mutaki, that Alvin Bragg has been threatened. We know that Donald Trump has a way of signaling to his base. That's why we had January 6th. He has a way of galvanizing his base. That's why Nancy Pelosi's poor husband was clobbered in the head with a hammer. So that's what Donald Trump does. Why do you think the judge, though, Mutaki, when the prosecution again brought it up, again, here we are talking about a president. We cannot lose sight of this. We're talking about a former president, someone who's running for president, where you got a prosecutor having to say to the judge, this man is dangerous. This man is threatening our prosecutor. We're worried not only about the prosecutor, we know he may try to threaten the jurors. He's attacked our whole judicial system. The guy that was elected to uphold our system is now attacking it. Why do you think the judge didn't come down harder on Trump and the team today, Mutaki?
I think the judge have to keep that appearance that he's impartial. And if he would have taken the prosecutor's position and came down hard, that would have given them a lot more fuel to come out and say, look, the prosecutor's against me, this unfair prosecution. Now, look, the judge is against me also. So I think the judge was smart in the way that he handled it. He addressed it kind of level-handed. And that way, if it continues, he can come down harder. But he can start off the way that he did, just by saying, "Hey, don't do that," and we'll address it later. So I think he was smart by doing that.
Yeah, when we come forward, more on the historic indictment of a former U.S. president. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.